Welcome back to Strata Unscripted. I am Katharine Olson from Groundbreaking Strata, and I am joined by my co-host Thomas Beattie from OctoAI.
Hi,
That's where you
Catherine.
wave. Yeah, perfect. Great. Are you good? Yay, first opening.
Yes.
It's awkward opening up a podcast. It's bizarre because you don't normally like pick up the phone and just start talking that way. Anyhow.
Last week, Mike Laporte put himself on. He did his own intro. I'm like, this is great. I don't even need to be here. And then actually at the Buildex conference, I ran into somebody who looked at me, stared at me, and was like, "I thought you were AI." Kind of creeped her out a little bit.
Well,
Hi, Jan.
I mean,
Nice
I
to see
see
you.
it. I get that. I see where she's coming from, actually. Well, I mean, okay, like so it's the whole idea of the show though. Like I bring the feelings, you bring the data. And if we think about it, the feelings are just the early warning system like in your gut, and then the data is the post-warning confirmation in your numbers, right?
There you
So
go.
there a lot of the time too we end up pointing at the same direction, and it's not a coincidence, right? It's signal density. I think that's what they call it.
Nice.
Yeah, I know. I'm learning stuff these days, hey. Um, Eli Report reads thousands of pages, across buildings all over the province, which means that when sometimes I give stories, they are anecdotal from experiences I've had or heard from colleagues. You are speaking from cross building signals, cross municipalities. And so I kind of wanted to dig more into that today. So I have some questions. When Eli Report is processing data across these buildings, what patterns are you seeing repeated in the buildings that are financially stable versus the ones that are clearly drifting?
So there's a huge regional difference, and we can come back to.
Interesting.
But as a whole, the buildings that are stable and on a good trajectory are putting enough into their reserves, and they're proactive about maintenance. And you can see that in the numbers. It's there in their budgets. It's showing that their repair and maintenance expenses are sufficient, and it's showing that their reserves are capitalized well enough to handle the expected repairs and replacements over a building's life cycle.
Okay, fair enough. Specifically, like if you were seeing buildings that are deferring their major funding decisions, what does it look like when you're going through the minutes? Like are you across your team, are you noticing any like language patterns or anything specifically that's coming up in those buildings that are the wait and see buildings?
So the AI is doing the reading of the minutes.
Yeah.
Our team, and there is a big team of us, I think there's now 14 of us that work on Eli Report as a team across admin, technology, and business. And we reconcile tabular and structured data from across all of the documents: budgets, insurance, expenditure tables from reserve fund studies or depreciation reports. But it's largely the AI that is reading the minutes and coming up with, what's being discussed. But what you see in buildings that have deferred maintenance, that are not proactive about their projects, is that they are choosing not to undertake projects and to push them off to some future unknown date. And it's a pattern. It's not a one-off. The buildings that do it a lot. And you see that because it leads to very inflated special levy forecasts in British Columbia, special assessments across most of the rest of North America. And it will only become more evident as the depreciation report rules that kick into effect in BC in 2026 and 2027, depending on whether you're in the Lower Mainland or Greater Victoria, or you're not. For depreciation reports that are being updated. And some of these depreciation reports that we still see were written in 2013. And I just want to kind of explain what all this means.
God.
Because in 2013, an engineer came around to their building and it assessed the remaining useful life of those assets based on their expertise. They don't have a crystal ball. They're a series of guesses. And as Mike Laporte, who joined me recently from Clarity and NLD, said, it's a series of probabilities. I want to guess everything so that there's a 50-50 chance it ends up being a shorter or longer life than I've estimated. And
educated guesses, to be clear.
Educated guesses, and then a series of guesses. A building might have 30, 40, 50, 100 building components. And he said it this way: I'm not going to flip heads 100 times. So some I will be wrong one way, some I will be wrong the other way. But on the whole, we have a very clear picture of what this building will need. And I thought that was fantastic because it takes something that looks a bit mysterious and simplifies it down to really good guesses made by smart people who are using probabilities to make sure that they get an approximately right answer. And I'm a huge fan of approximately right over precisely wrong. And I think that's it's super important for people to understand that being approximately right will give you a very good sense of how the future will be. So all these reports that were written in 2013 that will be updated now, if they haven't been already, are going to give them a more accurate reflection of what's happening in their communities. And I would say that there's probably strong correlation between those that were regularly doing their studies and those that were doing the work on time, and those that chose to defer. So I think there's going to be a pretty ugly situation emerging from an already ugly situation with respect to special levies in British Columbia and what that looks like over the next several years. And it really, it's going to become evident because you've got building components that are now being used well past their useful life. And the costs that would have been estimated in 2013 are dramatically higher today. We had a period of significant inflation over the COVID years, and building in general has building components have accelerated at a higher rate than consumer inflation. So the numbers are not going to get any better as these reports are updated, or at least that's my strong sense.
Yeah, I think it's smart at this point to do a thorough job of maintaining the components to extend that lifespan. That's going to be really clear to a lot of buildings. It's interesting too, you said about being like, how did you phrase it? Partially right?
Approximately right.
Approximately right. And I find that pretty interesting because a lot of the time you see councils that end up obtaining multiple engineering opinions or reports just to try to find the cheapest answer that they want. And in the meantime, they've wasted a lot of time. And in general, the engineers are not going to undo each other's work or undermine each other professionally. If you've met engineers, that's not really the kind of group of people they are. They're there for the measurements and the numbers, right? So no, it's such a waste. You got a solid trusted engineering report. Don't do a second and third one and wait 3 more years. Like
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's worth getting quotes if you're having work done. That is the practice.
Oh no, not
Live
quotes.
and breathe
I mean
that.
multiple
Yes,
engineering
studies.
reports for the same
Absolutely.
thing.
You may choose to have a special report prepared on a specific asset, and that is not uncommon. We see it all the
Yeah.
time. So you might have a depreciation report updated. There were multiple issues in your parkade. So you get a special building envelope consultant, somebody that specializes in this area of work, and you get them to investigate the multiple sources of water ingress into your parkade. So that type of specialist work is great, but you're right. Trying to shop around for someone who's going to, the engineers that write your depreciation reports want you to review it and discuss it with them and have the conversation about their building and about their
Yes.
priorities. This is a document that is being prepared by them that is to be used to benefit every owner in that community. And to the extent that the Strata Council can have that discussion and understand why the engineer is making certain recommendations, and perhaps for them to discuss certain aspects about how proactive maintenance could extend the life of certain building assets, I think is absolutely worthwhile. And they will revise their report reasonably in discussion with the Strata Council to come up with a good, practical, realistic plan.
Yeah, I mean, because if the three options for funding don't suit your strata and what realistically, the ownership has an appetite to do or fits the lifestyle or what makes sense for them, they can plan out different routes for you. But they're not going to drastically change the data to make it seem different than it is. What they might do is change certain portions based on new information. Oh, we missed this upgrade to this thing that you didn't give us documentation for. Okay, great. Now you've given it to us. Now we can update it. And engineers are such a great crew, actually. Like, they're a steady bunch. You're not going to get one usually that's like super, like, oh my God, this is the funnest thing to talk about in the world. No offense, love you guys. But
Hey,
they have
they
so
love
much
this stuff.
knowledge. Hey, I didn't say that. They have so much knowledge and they want to share it with you. Let them. Like, if you have a depreciation report dropping, for your next council meeting as a strata manager, invite the lead engineer to come to that meeting, to do a like debriefing, and make sure that you've planned within the cost potentially of the depreciation or quote to include a council meeting or an AGM town hall, so that the engineer can go over the highlights with them and let them ask questions, and then that way they can feel more ownership and more participation in it too. So yeah.
I think that's really good idea, and they can explain why things are set in a certain time frame. They can point out, and you mentioned the three scenarios for people that haven't been through these. The engineer in British Columbia will prepare three different scenarios. One is kind of status quo, one is fully funded, and one is somewhere in between. And the reason that we have to prepare three is that none of the stratas in British Columbia are approaching things from the perspective of being adequately funded as they do in Ontario and Alberta. Ontario is perhaps the most strict, but Alberta also has this concept of being sufficiently funded. And they're both in a much better place when it comes to their reserve funds and their planning. But in British Columbia, you get the three scenarios that they're setting out there, trying to make everyone in the community aware of what this means for them as time passes. And
Yep.
really, it's a question of how much do you pay now as you're consuming the useful life of each of your building components versus how much do you kind of fob off to the future or hope to pass to the next owner, because you're not going to be there in 10 years when X is needing doing. So why would you pay for it? And it's really under my skin in British Columbia. We are not doing it well, and
Yeah.
the data, and I'm going to put out some data on this, is continuing to be as ugly as we thought, and worse as we look into the future.
It's discouraging, to be honest. Like, we're really good at pass the buck roulette, basically, in BC with stratas. Like, you don't get to live in a building for its duration of its life without paying for that portion of it. And it's not just like who gets the best luck of not being there when the levy passes. Like, that's such a short term, like, not community minded way of looking at it.
You're
So,
right. It's not community mind. It's
so
very individualistic. I mean, if you think
yep,
about a detached home, the responsibility for its upkeep and the timing of you paying for it is basically when it's there. Very few of us
yep.
would have our own little reserve fund for it. We'd know, oh my gosh, my roof is going to last for whatever 25 years. It's in year 27. I can tell that it's not going to make it much longer. I have to budget for this, but very few of us have proactively
Or I'm
saved
going to
over
sell
its life.
it and that buyer's going to see that roof is crap. I'm going to negotiate lower because I'm going to have to replace this roof next year. And that's the other thing is, and I want to bring it back to this, is
Yes.
you deal with a lot of realtors, and have them a lot that use Eli Report. When Eli Report's generating those reports for like prospective buyers or realtors, what signals tend to make them nervous that they are seeing as patterns right now?
I mean, overall, and we do prepare these reports for buyers and sellers agents, for property
Yeah.
managers, for lawyers, and for others. So there's all sorts of people that are using it. The ultimate result is that this tool is something that helps to ensure that everybody has a better understanding of the community and helps you find the right price. Because if there is a major project upcoming that the buyer wasn't anticipating or prepared for, and they were already stretched with their mortgage payments to make this, and another $30,000 makes the difference for them. And $30,000 is not a crazy or unusual special levy in this province. Um, that knowledge and that information is used by realtors to help their clients find the right price or find the right home. If they can't afford to make the numbers work with this particular community, they have to look elsewhere. And we have heard that from realtors. Initially, I was a little bit concerned. I was especially concerned that we may have done something wrong. My client didn't do this deal because they saw a $50,000 levy expected in 2027. So it's a couple of years ago. And, we have a team that works very hard to try and get things right. And I was worried that we may not have. Well, according to all of the data and documents, we did. And that levy is expected. It may or may not come to pass as projected by the engineer when they wrote that depreciation report. But the buyer was well informed enough to know that that $50,000 levy was not in their budget. And they found another home, and they found it a week later. So all is well that ends well. Being informed and empowered helps you make the right decision. That's what Eli Report is all about. And what is it that they're most concerned about as realtors, as buyers? It's what am I not seeing when I fell in love with this unit, when I came around and placed my offer? Because there's nothing more emotional than the decision about where you're going to live and spend your time with your family. So it's an emotional decision. This is the reality check for, hey, what does this mean for me?
Yeah, and I think it should be a wake-up call too. I think it's interesting that you said that you guys as a team were like, "Oh, did we do something wrong?" But it's like, okay, so you have data that's publicly available data, and you're interpreting it in plain language and pointing out patterns, and somehow that's the wrong thing, instead of the buildings that are consistently deferring maintenance or not maintaining their buildings. And I think here's this hard part where sometimes when someone's up against a truth that makes them uncomfortable, they'd rather push on the person saying the truth than try to come to terms with, how do I make changes if I don't like this truth about myself or my building, right? Because
and we
whether
hope
or
it
not
isn't the truth.
you,
Like,
well, like, and whether or not they decide to do something with it, this data is out there. And if Eli Report wasn't doing it, any number of other brokerages and other firms do versions of these things. There's ways
absolutely.
to parse the data. It's out there. It exists. You could stick your head in the sand, but your story as a building's already being broadcasted, whether or not you want it to be. So what are you going to do with that is, the question, I think, more so.
That is
So the flip side, when you see buildings that are going from like structurally underfunded or like blah, 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 to like actually trying and moving the dial, have you seen patterns of that in certain areas, or anything, any trends that way?
Yeah, I mean, renewal happens, and strata councils change, their attitudes of owners change. There are certain communities that are probably on a steady trajectory, and they attract an ownership base that is of a similar mindset. They are not proactive maintenance minded. They are trying to address the always difficult question of affordability, and it is very unfortunate when someone who is not capable of continuing to fund what it's needed for their community to find themselves in a position where they may need to move. And
Yeah.
it I don't have numbers on that, but it happens. There are people on fixed income who cannot afford a significant change to their strata fees, who cannot afford a significant special levy. And unfortunately, in that situation, if there is a more proactive council that comes in, or if reality has clicked and you have no choice but to undertake those projects that you have deferred, some people will need to move. And I mean, you are a product of the decisions that you've made in terms of getting into that community in the first place, and in terms of being part of it as it was funded over the past. But that is a reality, and there's nothing that any engineer report or anything else can do about that.
Oh, I agree. Um, yeah, no, absolutely. And I think too, if you know that that's the case, there's always a chance where, okay, you can't undo everything that's been done in the past. But if you see this data coming, these things about your building, What are you doing to stop the cycle now, to level set, reset, involve your ownership actively, and then start maybe getting your CRF on a better path? Like, I've had discussions and heard lunch and learns, and every single engineer and lawyer on the planet will do the like legal disclaimer that says like, you can't quote me on this, so I can't quote you on any of them, and you can't quote me either. Legal disclaimer. But I mean, at minimum, you should be putting at least probably 30%, 25 to 30% of every operating year into your CRF if you don't want to do special levies. And you can just, yeah, it's going to be a big sticker shock for the first couple of years. But if you just rip off the Band-Aid and start doing it, then then it's done, right? The first leap is always the worst. Um,
I'm glancing aside to look at some of the visuals that we'll be putting out in our 2026 Canadian Condo Review. And
yeah,
Ontario is putting aside 30 to 40% of their operating budget. British Columbia's requirement is 10. And
10.
as of the latest data we've seen, the average is somewhere in that 15, 16% range.
Yeah.
Um, the
Well, and then
data
you get
on funding
councils
is
just
crazy.
using their CRF reserves for silly things. Like now, I'm not going to call it any names, but in a family member's strata that they're on the council of, they just did a CRF expenditure of lighting upgrades because the local law enforcement said there'd been, a break-in next door and maybe another one down the block. And apparently it had been disputed by a resident, this process of spending the money under Section 98. I was like, well, but did they like the lighting? It's okay then. And the point is that it's not meant to be used that way. You have to guard your CRF judiciously and carefully. Like you should be stocking that and using it for actual renewals that are necessary to the integrity of your building, not because you need to do a lighting upgrade or because you didn't like the paint color, right? Like that you need to factor in elsewhere, like aesthetic upgrades and things. That's where you need to start talking about levies or changing your budget structure to accommodate a rotating plan where you do the fencing painting segment by segment and it's just in the budget every year. So like,
Katharine will return. I see her. She's absolutely right, of course, because if you are spending your CRF on
sorry.
things that are not properly allocated, then you're going to not have those funds for what's necessary. A good depreciation report will have in it a period when there is supposed to be a lighting upgrade. But if you're doing it out of cycle for a non repair or replacement required, then obviously that shouldn't be out of your reserve fund. It should be taken out of an operating budget. And Katharine was just leading into that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. um I kind of went down a digression anyhow. I had a couple other questions here I wanted to ask you more just from the, because like I'm honestly curious to hear about the patterns that you're seeing. And when like, okay, one of the most common phrases for stratas is like, let's just monitor it for another year, or let's just patch that thing for another year. um if every building was like actually asked honestly, like what happens if we leave this for another 5 years, what would you say when you see the patterns across would probably surprise most councils? Things that are deferred 5 years plus, because 5 years doesn't even seem that much in their minds sometimes, but it can make a big difference.
It does. I think the real problem is the kind of compounding effect of time. Because if you're deferring something, you're going to run into the next thing, and then you've got no choice but to make your levy bigger or defer that thing, and that's where you see problems. Our provincial budget came out this week. Um, ouch. Uh, when you do not budget properly and pay for what you can afford to pay, you find yourself in an increasingly desperate situation.
Mm,
And we are experiencing that on a macro level with enormous record setting deficits projected at a time when our borrowing cost is increasing. I think I saw some numbers that indicated that if debt service was a department, it would be the fourth largest department in our province. And that is only going to get worse
mm.
if you add what is, well, somewhere on the order of 7 to 10% of your debt in new deficit and debt over the next several years.
But you actually see this happening in stratas too, because
Yeah.
of this compounding renewal dates that are stacking up, then stratas are having to look to doing loans, and then they're basically, because the act also allows you to borrow against future strata fees, so you can put it in. There's a way that they do this with the contract with the credit unions, where essentially you have a line item on your budget for the next 10 years or 5 years or whatever it is that will be like $50,000 or whatever it is. So you're going to see again the same thing happen, where you get these stratas that are paying now for stuff that they've done in the past, but then current projects are also stacking up while they're still paying off the old ones. Like, it's, oh my gosh, this is going to be, I'm smiling because I don't want to
Yeah, I mean,
cry, I
condo
think.
lending is common in America, and they often would do that if they had a big project. It of course gets put onto your condo fees along with the interest that you've got on that loan,
Yeah.
but you didn't have to go out of pocket to pay for that. What would be a special levy or special assessment. But you're right, you do have this compounding effect because now you're paying off the old new roof while using that new roof and its useful life heading towards the next one. And most
Yeah.
lenders are pretty clever, and they're only going to give you a loan that lasts half or maybe 70% of the expected life of that new asset, so that you don't need a new roof before you've paid off the old roof. But that notwithstanding, you are compounding your problems. Condo lending is a viable option if you had a community of people on fixed income that really couldn't
Yep.
afford
I
a
mean,
special levy,
honestly,
then
it's
maybe that's a solution.
yeah, exactly. And as a last case scenario, I find too, though, I will say, if it's not a significant population of your ownership that wants to go down that route, think seriously again about doing something else, because the process of going through it is a real pain. And I found that multiple times now ownerships have undertaken it that seem to have 70-80% approval for undertaking it, ended up only having like a tenth of the ownership actually end up using the loan, and then others found their own private lending or renegotiated to add onto their mortgage or borrowed money from family or whatever. um, and okay, I like, again, I don't told this story on another one, but there's been even times at the brokerage that I work with now where other members of the community paid the strata, the special levy for owners they know couldn't pay anonymously, which was really cool. So like, there's all kinds of possibilities out there, some better than others, obviously.
For sure.
Can you tell us about this the new resource that's dropping? You said you have something coming out in the next couple of days, new platform.
We do. So the report that we're putting out is one for the general public. It's going to give them a sense of what the state of condos is in Canada. We focused on British Columbia, Ontario, and Alberta. They have a high density of condominiums, and we have enough intelligence on them to be able to provide some insights. It tells a very interesting story by jurisdiction, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses. British Columbia has the special levy problem. Ontario has a disclosure problem. It's kind of interesting, but in BC and Alberta, you get 12 and 24 months of meeting minutes as part of your disclosure package if you're interested in buying. In Ontario, you get a status certificate, which is sort of similar to what we call a Form B in British Columbia with the attachments that you get, but they're not required to give you the meeting minutes or the full engineering studies, including the reserve fund study. A couple of page financial summary comes to you. But I have a big problem with that difference in disclosure, because if you're buying into a community, you know nothing about the day-to-day issues that are going to affect your life as an owner occupant. The status certificate might be sufficient for an investor owner who doesn't intend to live there. But if there are repeat security incidents, if you've got pest infestations, if the elevators are always on the fritz, if there is about to be an envelope project, you might see the dollar impact in your
Very
2027
litigious
table.
ownership that's always suing each
All of
other.
it. Now, litigation that is underway is disclosed in a status certificate,
Yeah.
but none of these other things
History, though.
are
Yeah.
there. And I find that lack of transparency super surprising.
Especially
And yet,
because in Ontario
apparently,
and Alberta, the board has more power to make funding decisions too. So
yeah,
that seems strange that they have
it
less
does.
disclosure and more power.
We're both trading on and off today. I don't know what's up with the
I
tech.
don't know what's going on with
Maybe it's the
tech. I don't
platform,
know. Yeah.
but we're here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are some of the interesting findings. Another hot topic this week is strata education. Um, why don't why don't you lead the conversation on that?
Oh, no, please.
Okay, so the BCREA came out suggesting that strata education should be mandatory in this province. And they pointed to Ontario, where there is now a mandated education scheme for all of their condo board members, and said that we should have something similar in this province. And I think in theory, you and I are generally in agreement with the expectation that it'd be nice if strata council members understood a bit more about the managing of a strata corporation.
Yeah.
Um, I think that BC is very different than Ontario. We have stratified all down to townhouses and duplexes, and we don't have the same structure. So I do think that we should make a bunch of carve outs to what is
Okay, so
mandatory.
I just want to push back a little bit because I was like
Yeah,
telling a story about the CCI webinar, and I think maybe the reason why the BCREA released the white paper and this news release is because the province has kind of insinuated they're not going to do anything about any strata education. Like there was a webinar with CCI in the fall in November where Housing Minister Christine Boyle said, no, there's no plans to do it. And I live in a duplex and it's easy and it's fine. Now, I was telling this story to my uncle, and he lives in North Van, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, after dinner we should go for a walk down the block," because like there's this duplex house that you'll see where half of it has had like the roof repaired and done, where it's like been like half painted and stuff. And I'm just laughing to myself because if that owner ever sells or anything, like you're telling me that the water leaks from the deterioration of the building envelope and stuff like that is just going to stay only on the other person's side. Oh, how wonderful.
yeah,
You know what I mean? So I'm like, no, stratas of all kinds are difficult. It's just that sometimes you have the luck to either have enough resources amongst all those owners to just make plans easily, or you all happen to get along well and be productive. But ultimately, spreadsheets are not the ones that are voting at the AGMs. Personalities are. So you can have all this data and all these reports and all these budgets, but ultimately it's Bob and Sue and Sally who are there, and they are
true.
very worked up and they feel very emotional about that budget, so or that resolution, and they vote it down. But guess what? Once that resolution's voted down, the roof keeps aging and the interest keeps compounding. Like it's so weird because they neither one stops and neither one goes forward. It's such a strange cycle we are in BC Strata. I feel like we all just need to like just put the foot down and say, okay, let's just stop this nonsense and move forward in a different way. Right. Because I mean, like with the BCREA paper, I kind of saw them maybe forcing the hand of the provincial government saying, okay, what you said is not going to be important. Well, we've done some research, we've put this stuff together, we're going to put it out there to the public anyways. Okay, great. Well, immediately the strata industry has had a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. um, and I think over the next few months, it's going to be really interesting because there's been already some public statements on LinkedIn and other places and news radio interviews and things in reaction and in response to the BCREA's release. So it's, again, the data might be great. Then in theory, all the things seemed great. But in practice, you've now released that to the public, to all these stakeholders and entities in the strata world and in housing world, which is very much the same as a council within a strata ownership. They have their own politics and their own personalities, and they're going to be the ones voting, not the white paper, right? So
Yeah, it's true.
it's,
I think that the situation is nuanced and that they need to make exemptions. If they're going to do some education, you got to have some carve outs. I think if you're going to do this, is it really necessary for everybody that's volunteered for their strata council to get it? I don't believe that it is necessary. Um,
Say,
recertification
like,
or
what's the problem with
ongoing
education?
education.
Clearly, these people who are fighting against mandatory education have never been to a Strata Live event, because I got people wanting to come back just for fun.
It
So
is fun. Education done well is fun. Education done badly and forced training can be really painful. And
yeah,
I've used the
that's true.
example before. I am a backup safety for my son's hockey team. I had to take 3 online courses and modules to get this safety certification. Each of the 3 reiterated some of the same lessons, and they were all time controlled. So I couldn't go next and answer the questions. I will not recertify. I am done. This 3-year cycle I'm in is the last time. If we do that for Strata, you are going to have willing volunteers on the sidelines because they are forced to do something that
Or
people
you
need.
invest in good education that people want,
Right.
A, or B, you
Yes.
start younger. So bring in curriculum into high school to teach high school students about it then. Because if you can't teach adults and you won't make it mandatory, teach them before that then. I'm sorry,
I
I
have
don't know.
been wanting to teach financial literacy in high schools forever. I
Yeah.
think it is, as a whole, a subject that needs to be discussed. And the real problem with trying to teach things to high school students is if they can't picture it for themselves, they have a really hard time learning and retaining it. So trying to explain mortgages and credit card debts to kids that don't have either of those is a tough thing. And I've
Although,
tried. I
honestly,
do it. It's still, I think
I
some of
don't
them
push back
grasp on to a
though.
little bit.
Like, a lot of them live in stratas though. Like when I was okay, so shout out to Dylan from Grime Fighters. He came, they sponsored Strata Gal Live Night 2 in the fall, and he came to it and he was sitting there all like Gen Z, like totally blasé afterwards. I was like, Dylan, did you get anything out of it, dude? Like, I can't tell. He's like, oh no, it was great. But like I've lived in a strata since I was a kid, right? So like, and he's awesome. I love, hi Dylan. But the point is, a lot of them have grown up in stratas, and I'm sure it would have even been more helpful to them if they had learned about it in high school and they could then impart your parents, because parents
That's
can learn
true.
from kids too, to be honest.
They
Like,
can, and
I
kids love to
even,
talk,
yeah,
and sometimes they'll share what they're doing at school. "What did you do today?" "Stuff." Um, but you can. The reality is that 25-ish% of our
yeah,
population lives in strata. So you're maybe hitting a quarter of the population
right now.
when you hit that. Yeah, and there's a trend that increases. You're never gonna get me to say we shouldn't do.
Oh, I got no audio, Thomas. All right, well, no. We might just have to call it today. I don't know. All right. Well, that is the universe telling us that you've heard enough from us today about special levies and future planning. I'm going to leave the end of this episode with the dedication that look at your depreciation report, plan ahead, because your future self will thank you. Goodbye.